Welcome to Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame mode fandom. My name is Wilder Adams, and the Minnesota Timberwolves, as we all know, they find a way to get you in and then pull you out. 4-game losing streak after being 27-14, and there's not a better person to talk about the Timberwolves and their state at this current point in time going into the trade deadline than Tim Garrison, who's newly a part of Daily Wolves. My guy, congratulations for that. How are you doing?
Thank you for the beautiful intro. Apologies, I'm a little nasally, just getting over some of the lovely wintertime cold and flu season over here. Doing well. Other than that, doing really well. Looking forward to not having -30 outside, and appreciate being on the podcast to talk some Wolves ball as always here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. The only thing colder than that temperature right now is the Minnesota Timberwolves. And God, man, I was starting to say some nasty things on TikTok and Twitter and making fun of the Rockets for being closer to the
Mhm.
play-in and the Minnesota being the 2 seed. And took 1 week and they're back in the play-in, man. And before we get started in today's show, I am so thrilled to tell you guys about the first ever Wilder Wolves podcast sponsor, 612 Tees. 612 offers a wide range of uniquely designed Minnesota sports tees, and you can see these awesome Timberwolves options right here because I am chronically online. The one that resonates with me is the Wizard of Nas t-shirt because I've spent a lot of time making memes, and I once made a Wizard of Nas meme, so it comes to life in this t-shirt, and I am definitely going to buy one. But there's not only Timberwolves tees here because you can look up here. There's a ton of different sports. You can also get crew necks, accessories, etc. There's a lot of Nas Reed agenda right here, and we always promote a Nas Reed agenda on Wilder Wolves. And then you see this really sick Justin Jefferson crew neck. Use the code Wilder25 to get 25% off your first purchase. It's a great way to support a small business, and it also helps this show out quite a bit. So definitely check them out. How did you? So let's start with this. So I felt good about the first 2 losses in this win streak, and
Yeah.
then the last 2 I just thought were blatantly immature, unfocused, and I thought they exposed a ton of limitations. So what are your first thoughts in regard to this losing streak in the grand scheme?
Yeah, I'm actually okay with those first two losses. I mean, Houston, with all that ball pressure they have and no Anthony Edwards, that's a tough draw. So that unfazed me. I also thought that the Spurs game was absolute cinema. Now, what I think has happened in these last two games is, the power rankings come out. Wolves are being talked about as a contender again. What a natural time for the Wolves to just kind of lose their focus in the middle of January. Ultimately, I think that's all this is. This team at every phase, when they get tired, they become unfocused. They kind of vomit all over themselves in a terrible loss. I think we're in one of those phases right now, and this is a little bit more dramatic because we haven't lost 4 games in a row in a very long time. Uh, Ultimately, my opinion about the team kind of remains unchanged. I think we're in the swan song of maybe Mike Conley, and there's a couple easy bankable adjustments you can make to improve the team internally. Uh, but I actually trend towards a little bit. My flags are raised, but I am not looking at the panic button quite yet.
Yeah, I'm with you. I wouldn't look at the panic button necessarily. I think this team has shown too many flashes for I still believe this despite being the 7
Yeah.
or 8 seed, whatever they are right now. I think 7. If the Timberwolves are locked in, if the Timberwolves are getting the best versions of their 4 to 5 best players, I think the only teams you can really argue have a higher upside this particular season are the Nuggets and the Spurs, or not the Spurs. I think Spurs are too young, the
Mhm.
Thunder and the Nuggets. So I think those 2 is where Minnesota should stand. Now, the frustrating thing with this team is it was pretty similar last year, which is why they were the 6th seed and they made the conference finals. And it feels like
Mhm.
every single year they have that thing about them, man. They lack this focus at these points in time. But a part of me, I want to hear what you think on this.
Mhm.
A part of me thinks this might be a blessing at this time of the year because the deadline is in 2 weeks. And I think a week ago, we were talking about this Timberwolves team like, oh my gosh, they are rolling. We
Yeah.
should probably stay pat because look, we don't know what the limitations are of this team, but we know this team's working right now, and it might be risky to mess this up. Now,
Yeah.
4-game losing streak, that is out the window. Out the window. I just threw it across the street. That is out the window.
Yeah.
So I think the timing of this, if this happened on February 10th, that would be where I would be like, shoot. But I do think this time frame, it could be a blessing because, of course, I think it has exposed if Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle and Jaden are not nearly perfect, the bench is a problem, a big problem. And there's no doubt to me this needs to be addressed. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the crux of it. Sneakily over the course of the year, and this is kind of a part of a larger point I want to make about Finch briefly. But over the course of the year, the starting lineup has started to become really good. And that's not a new thing when it comes to Chris Finch. He's a very macro coach. I think there's a lot of fair criticism of Finch. But what people need to realize is we only talk about it when it's the obvious negative in terms of Mike Conley getting 15 minutes when we clearly have other options that might be better. The positives of it are, let's take a look at the Julius Randle and Naz Reid pairing. That was a disaster pairing for the first 2 months of the year. It slowly crept back because of Finch's faith and determination to make it work. That is not unique to this year. His trust in certain lineups of like, okay, I know these guys can work. They just got to play this certain way. And that belief has really paid dividends. And it's a reason why we've become such a potent playoff team, because we have the ability to play so many different ways. And we put in those reps during the season, even though it cost us a loss in November. So I think there's some bankable options. We're fortunate that we have we're fortunate in terms of Chris Finch, where he's not going to make that aggressive change off of one little game. The downside of that is it can take you a little bit of time to move on from a Mike Conley. It can take a lot of time. And that's what we're kind of seeing right now. Over the last couple weeks, we've already known that we really need a seventh man, but it has never been more apparent than this 4-game losing streak how badly we need one more producer who can be a ball mover. Preferably, I'd love him to be a two-way player so they can shore up a defense, maybe take on guard matchups so you can play Jaden McDaniels off ball. We really just need a true to God seventh man. The bench scoring is 21st. A lot of lineups don't do very well off the bench, and we can give up leads, and ultimately that cuts into our starting lineup. That's a positive. I believe they're around a net rating of 10. So yeah, I think it's really just written home about how much we really need that seventh man, and someone who can fill those gaps, maybe have a little bit of ball handling, some defense, and some shooting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame it, because I think a lot of people, and there might be some truth to this, I think there probably is some truth to this. Chris Finch has a great relationship with Mike Conley. And I think a lot of people are going to look at it and say, Chris Finch gives a really short leash to certain people, and then Mike Conley, it is the longest leash you'll ever see in your life. And I think there's some truth to that, but there's that other element where you mentioned he's also super patient with what he thinks works. And it can be frustrating when it doesn't work because it just looks stubborn. But historically, it's also worked at certain points. We could talk about the last year when Julius Randle wasn't working for 50 games, and you're like, what is going on? Or the Rudy Gobert and Cat pairing a few years ago, where it just didn't look good at all, but they just kept sticking with it. And eventually they became the number one seed most of that 23-24 season. So I think there is definitely some beauties and some pains on this, but I will say this, like, this is completely, I think this is confirmed. That seventh man needs to get addressed, and Mike Conley can't be in the rotation the rest of the year. I thought that last season that was apparent when he was averaging 4 points on 21% in the conference finals. But then this season, since December, shooting below 30 from three, below 30 from the free throw line, averaging less than 5 points a game. The team is 8 points better per 100 possessions with him off the court.
Yeah.
Dane Moore has called him the safe pick in the rotation. Chris Finch wants safety around your main star. The problem
Yeah.
with that is it isn't safe anymore. As a matter of
No.
fact, it's probably even riskier than playing Rob Dillingham at this point. That's how bad it is. So it's not safe anymore. And I'm not sure how close Chris Finch is to taking Mike Conley out of the rotation. I'm getting to this point where I'm considering the idea, and this might sound crazy. Tim Connolly might just have to step into this and say,
Yeah.
we need to save our team from ourselves. We actually need to trade Mike Conley. And I think that sounds controversial because of his locker room presence here and that. But you hear people talk, and I listened to that press conference the other day where Rudy Gobert's talking about Mike Conley needing to be more aggressive, and Mike Conley talking about he can't get into a rhythm. I'm worried that this team is in that denial phase of where Mike Conley is in his career. So they want him to keep leaning in, keep leaning in, keep leaning in, when everybody else in the outside perspective who doesn't have the emotional attachment to somebody who's clearly a very good guy, that it's just not the same Mike Conley anymore.
Yeah.
And Mike Conley's faith has been something that's helped the team get to the conference finals. But my fear is this faith in Mike Conley can also ruin this season.
Yeah.
So Tim Connolly, he might have to get to this point because he's watching from the outside. He says, you know what? I'm willing to make tough decisions. I am willing to deal with Karl Anthony Towns. I am willing to trade the entire roster from Rudy Gobert. He got off Patrick Beverley before his welcome got warmed out. So I wouldn't be shocked, just speculating on the outside. He's like, maybe I need to step into this, and I don't want to do this, but it's time to trade Mike Conley to save this team from themselves because he's going to keep getting that opportunity, I fear, and it's not going to work.
Yeah. And, I think, if you're looking at adding somebody and you're playing that 240 minutes, it's pretty clear where the minutes are going to come from. It's going it's going to cut in. It's probably likely going to cut out Bones Highland out of the rotation. It's going to take all of Mike's minutes. And maybe you scale, depending on who the player is, maybe you even scale back Dante from a 32-minute role to like a 30-minute role. So the minutes are going to come from Mike Conley. If you go trade for somebody, they're going to come from Mike Conley. It's going to come from Bones. It's going to come maybe 2-3 minutes from Dante. So built in, when you make a trade, I think you're forcing the hand on Mike Conley. But it really just matters on who you're getting. Right now, I don't really know if they're going to be able to be willing to trade Mike. So I think what I'm fixated on are people that make 9.2 million or less. Why 9.2 million or less? That is the aggregated salaries of Terrence Shannon Jr. and Rob Dillingham. So we can salary match. Now, I do say people, hey, we have $3.5 million under the second apron. Why can't we just tap into that? Well, if you take back, yes, we have an exception, actually. Just to put a pin in it, we do have a trade exception from Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So we can take back more money than we receive. That would also hard cap us at the second apron and limit financial flexibility. So you don't really want to use that double-edged sword if you don't have to. And I really don't think they tap into that unless they friggin' love the player. So I'm talking like maybe you can get Andrew Nemhard for a protected pick, Rob Dillingham and Mike Conley. Maybe that's the situation that they'd actually tap into that exception. I don't think that's realistic, by the way, for listeners. But yeah, it's just a weird position for the Wolves.
Could we talk about that before we get fully into the first apron? Because we are going to go, and you already started it off. Shout out to you. We're going to get into the first apron and talk about those limitations and kind of why or Minnesota is just a couple million under the second apron.
Yeah.
But I just think it's kind of maddening to me that this team is so willing to cut bait off of young players, but with a 37-year-old guard, it's like, I can't do it. Like, he's a nice guy. He's a good leader. Because this is what I've seen on the court. And I'm not saying Mike Conley isn't a super impactful leader who knows what he's doing. I'm not saying he isn't. This team has been immature with him and without him.
Yeah.
That's the truth. If Mike Conley's maturity was the biggest factor in all of this, by the way, he went 37 minutes without a point to the last 3 games. And last game, he was 3 points on 1 for 5. If that was true, they wouldn't lose to the Jazz and Bulls in the fourth quarter. So I think we are overstating how critical that voice in that regard is. I don't think the moment he walks out of the room, the team is going to emotionally splat. And if you believe that, this team is not winning a championship anyway.
Yeah.
So that's where I get really like frustrated with it. If there's something outside the court, and there's been something about the team having a like unofficial kind of unspoken, we're not going to trade you in a dump situation at the end of your career. I get the moral aspect of that. And if that's the thing, you don't have to love it, but that's just what it is. But if the argument is this team can't function without Mike Conley, one, I fully disagree. And number two, if that is the case, this team is not winning the championship anyway. I listened to the conference the other day, and I keep hearing this team needs to mature. This team needs to mature. This team needs to mature. Why isn't it happening with Mike Conley either? So
Yeah.
that's where, and I'm not saying he's a bad leader. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying I'm worried that the entire team's championship hopes and fate is way too dependent on a player who we might be overstating what he can do at this point in time.
Yeah. And you know what? I just want to add this before we dive into it. I would not be surprised if we hear a little bit more detail post Rob Dillingham trade about why he didn't play. It like from the outside looking in, it's perplexing. You have Mike Conley playing all these minutes, clearly washed up. I mean, if he was even just hitting 40% of his threes, he was hitting 45%, so it's not a Figuzi number. 45% 2 years ago. It'd be different because he does provide a calming presence. There are still positives he does on the floor, but he is so bad and so heavily targeted on defense, and he cannot do anything with the floor spacing, wide open looks that he's getting. That all those positive things just don't matter anymore. So I'm going to be intrigued. You know, a month goes by post Rob Dillingham. If there's a couple things that leak out as to why, I just think there's more to it. I don't think it's as simple as like, hey, like just play him. Like, what are we doing? I think there's more to behind the scenes of what's going on with Rob Dillingham, and I have a lot of faith that we'll figure out what's going on once he leaves.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that was such a great perspective to add to it because I don't want this to start this narrative that it's only about Mike Conley and that the team is sinking their hopes into Mike Conley over a lottery pick. They traded up for Rob Dillingham for a reason. They knew Mike Conley's time was close to the end. And you can argue whether you think they've been a little too far or against the young player relative to veteran thing. But like you said, I think there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that will never be talked about. And the NBA, because it's the ultimate soap opera, the moment somebody gets traded, you're going to hear all the gossip. You're going to get all the tea. So there's definitely more to it. And I've heard like John Kay like talk about on his show that there's been some, disconnect between he and his role since the very beginning on the team. And clearly Rob's confidence is gone. So I think it's true. This isn't just a Mike Conley thing. And it's going to be very interesting to navigate. So I appreciate you throwing that element into it because we don't want to start that narrative either.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables that as fans we'll never see. It looks so simple from our perspective watching it, either in the building or on TV of like, why can't we get Rob Dillingham in? I just think there has to be a little bit more to the story. And if there's not more to the story, then it absolutely deserves to be criticized. Don't get me wrong. We should be talking about how we just gave up 2 future first round picks to go get this guy and didn't play him. So to me, in order to reconcile it, I'm expecting to hear some sort of Johnny K piece about like, hey, this is kind of what happened. There was just, like you said, just a disconnect. I'm sure there'll be more pieces to the puzzle that get placed in our laps and we can kind of put together the picture once he's gone.
I'm very curious, and this is just kind of thinking out loud right now. I'm very just curious how much, and I don't think we'll ever know this question, but how on the same page was Chris Finch with Tim Connolly on trading up for Rob?
I think it was 2 different teams. That's been said, I think, across multiple different media members. It was 2 different teams. We needed a point guard or another guard play before we did the Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo. I think Rob was brought in for that team.
Yeah.
I think post-trade, when you go and acquire a player like Julius, who's a playmaker out of the post, and you get a guard that blocks guard minutes, I think the team and the way they wanted to play changed. So maybe it was. I can't imagine. We've heard so many people say that those two are in lockstep. I can't imagine they didn't talk about it. That just
Mhm.
that would blow my mind.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not Tim's MO. Tim Conley runs a ship of a unified front. He asks for everyone's input. So it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't be in lockstep. What I think happened is they made the Rob Dillingham trade with an eye on one specific team build. And then they ended up getting that linchpin player that allowed them to be happy with the Karl Anthony Towns trade. And now they have a completely different team,
Mhm.
which ultimately it does deserve some criticism. You should build your team to be malleable. And right now it looks like we made two different trades, and one, it's a bad trade. The Rob Dillingham trade up, no matter what, is a bad trade.
Mhm.
The only thing that could probably save it is we trade Rob for somebody who subsequently breaks out and, and can take over as our he's our number 6 pick, kind of like we do for Naz Reid and Jarrett Culver. Um, that's the only way I think we can salvage how bad the Rob Dillingham trade up was.
And I think you're right. I think they had a vision for Rob on the team in the immediate future. A part of me is also just like, that's a lot to ask for an 18-year-old point guard on a team that just
Yeah.
went to the conference finals, who is literally my size. And that's the part where I'm kind of maddened by it. Like, was
Hmm.
Chris Finch, we know this, and this isn't a bad thing about him. I think this is more so a good thing on a good basketball team. He's just not going to give opportunities to young players out of the gate. He's just not. We've seen Beringer play very good in his minutes he's been given, and he still gets these random 3 or 4 minute stints. It's not
Yeah.
Chris Finch's nature to say, you know what, let's go all in for a young guard. So
Mm.
the process, I'm still just a little skeptical on, because I don't think Finch is the type who would always want to put his chips on a contending team into a player like Rob Dillingham in the first place.
Mm.
So if the pitch was he's going to play right away and he's going to be like this big player, and then all of a sudden is not the case, and they're so willingly to just put Rob out of the rotation the moment they get Dante and Randall, that's the part where I'm still skeptical on.
Yeah.
What was Rob Dillingham's purpose here?
Well, especially, and to poke holes in my own theory, especially given that I thought Rob had some good, really good games in November last year, where it almost felt like he was breaking into the rotation. He was playing with swagger. A lot of people reference that Rockets game, and I agree with it. The Rockets playing in-season playoff game in November. He was incredible, and we arguably lost that game because we didn't play him in overtime after he brought us back in the fourth quarter. Um, so it's strange. There just has to be more to the story behind the scenes. It doesn't make sense. There's missing puzzle pieces. The only thing I'm certain on is we made a very poor trade, because if we didn't make that trade, we would have 3 tradable firsts this summer. Think about that. 3 tradable firsts. We could put together a package for anybody. So it's tough. It's a bad trade all around. The only thing that can really salvage it is, can you get a contributor this deadline for Rob Dillingham that can help boost the odds this year, and someone that we can also re-sign and be a contributor moving forward. I think that's the only way I can reconcile and at least be okay with not being overly critical of the Rob Dillingham trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this one last thing about Rob Dillingham before we
Yeah.
transition on, because I'm just going to completely speculate. I think we
Yeah.
are going to see his name in a trade pretty soon. And
Hmm.
if that happens, we can go way further on the obituary of Rob in Minnesota. We can go
Yeah.
way further into that. But I do think there's also just a personality misalignment here with how
Yeah.
Finch wants his teams to be ran around a star versus what Rob was. Rob was a social media sensation. Rob was overtime. Rob was Kanye student. Rob was Kentucky basketball. I'm not saying this in a rude way. I'm sure he had a lot given to him in terms of just
Mhm.
confidence and persona and
Oh,
status.
yeah.
That's a lot for a young kid. Then you go to a team and Chris Finch says, I don't care who you are. We're going to play the
Mhm.
guys who I think are going to win us basketball games right now. So Rob goes from top of the world to
Yeah.
the 12th guy on the team. And I'm sure that didn't sit well with him. Like Ants even talked about in post games. Rob would be like, what, you don't think I can play either? Kind
Yeah.
of questioning the coach maybe a little bit. And we saw that confidence from when he first came into the league quickly drain out of him,
Yeah.
where I don't think he's ever dealt with not being the priority.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think for some people that just bugs them more than others.
You know, I think if Rob Dillingham went to the Washington Wizards, he'd be averaging 17 points and 7 assists.
I don't disagree.
I think he'd be now quality NBA player is it's funny because I was super high on Rob coming out. I still think that all the natural talent's there. I think he can be a phenomenal player. I just don't think it's happening in Minnesota, regardless. Um, I don't know. I now have questions. Like even if he goes and he's a 17-7 guy, is he just like an Emmanuel Quickly who can be kind of good, but really he's in that awkward, you know, can demand that contract of 25-30 million dollars, but is he really worth 25-30 million dollars? I think he's going to be headed towards that archetype of he's got to be an elite point guard, and I think that's what the Wolves are trying to get him to do. And I think the quick hooks are really him tapping into that social media sensation of like, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to show him what I can do. And I think he gets those quick hooks because he'll maybe do that and miss the shot or he'll do something. Um, and that's where I think those quick hooks are doing. I think he's blatantly not doing what the coaching staff is wanting him to do.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
And you know what? If he filled it up and got 20 points and he did that a couple times and he only had a bad game here and there, I think he could probably change your opinion. The problem is he's not doing it at a level he needs to blatantly not obey the coaching staff. Um,
I
that's
think
just
you're
where I
right.
fall.
I think you totally nailed it. I think that's where the disconnect is. It's the individualistic mindset versus the team mindset. That's the difference. And that's what you get from a lot of young basketball players who have a lot going for them. And I'll tell you this, I know some basketball players, man, who are not nearly the status of Rob Dillingham. And I talk to them and I'm like, dude, like ground yourself a little bit. So that's common. That's common. So that type of mindset can get in the way of a team too, in your own development, if you keep taking it personal. And that's where I think things might be going wrong.
And before we dive into the trades, because I think that's where we're heading in the next couple seconds here, it's going to be really infuriating watching him play really like put up stats on a different team from afar, where we're not watching all the little things here and there. Because we're going to hear all like, oh, come on, Chris. Like, why don't you play Rob Dillingham? He's going off right now for the whoever tanking team. It's just, though, that's going to be inevitable. I think Rob's going to go produce somewhere. Whether it's going to be winning basketball, I have questions on still. But just it's not going to happen in Minnesota because I don't think he's doing what Minnesota's asking him to do. Unfortunately, we need a different skill set, anyways. To be honest with you, I think we need another defender more than we need a pure point guard off the bench.
I think you're onto something there. And before we get into it, I'm just kind of going through some of the comments of how people feel about this 4-game losing streak. And a pretty common theme is just, you know, not a lot of worry, which I think is pretty good from this fan base. There's not a lot of panic as I go through the comments. It's a lot of just effort things. Like Jeff Pryor goes not worried because they don't play hard against teams they don't respect. They'll play hard against good teams in the playoffs. I think your point, adding to the fatigue toward the deadline, I think that's true. And I think for a team that's pretty shallow, man, when your team is top heavy and those guys are tired, that makes things only worse. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I think they're in the doldrums of the season right now. I think they're, the NBA season, it's up and down, up and down. You're seeing it with OKC, even like the best team. Everyone already pretty much wants to hand them a championship. They're going through a tough time right now too. They're not much better than the Wolves of the last couple weeks.
Yeah.
So it's
Also
just
the Pacers.
Yeah, I'm not all that worried. I think 4 losses is enough to like, all right, what are we doing, guys? A 4-game losing streak? We haven't had that since like I think it's the first Rudy Gobert year. Like, what are we doing? Um, I'm not worried yet. I mean, if they go and lose tonight, like, what the hell? You're at home. It's a
That'd be bad.
Saturday.
5 in a
Like,
row.
5 in a row. Like, come on, guys. You're playing at least a decent team in the Warriors who have Steph Curry. Like, if they lose tonight, I'm going to be a little bit upset. Still not going to completely change my opinion. I still think this is a team with a puncher's chance to win a championship because we have Anthony Edwards. I also think that we're not that far off. I think a couple minor tweaks. We are a couple minor tweaks away, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm not. I'm excited to watch the game tonight, but I don't think we're that far away.
I think you're right. And thank you to everybody who commented your take on the team. I got nearly 60 comments, just mainly we're not worried. And I think that's a good way to put it. And I also think you're totally right. Just the ceiling of this team is still there.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting to the point that those little tweaks we talk about, these aren't just luxuries anymore. I think they're necessities. If they go to February 6th and this team made no deal and they're trying to sell us on 30 more games of, okay, let's see Jalen Clark, Mike Conley, let's see how much offense you can make. I am going to be this is a tier 2 team in the West pretty firmly now.
I agree with you. And I think if they stand pat, because that's a possibility, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a possibility we got to brace for. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's probably about a 60-70% chance we make a move. That said, if they stand pat, I think it's a direct bet on Terrence Shannon Jr. Because really, and we're going to get into this, I think we should dive into the trade piece here. Really, I'm kind of searching for a combo guard version of Terrence Shannon Jr. Someone who can score a little bit, come in, defend, take on some matchups. So if they stand pat, they are, and I think Dane Moore talked about this, they're just betting and taking that risk on Terrence Shannon Jr. being that 7th man. And it's a risk, in my opinion. Even though I'm really high on TJ, it's just, I think he's 25 now, and he's been injured all year with a weird foot injury. It's just, I don't know if that's a risk that we should take.
That is not, absolutely not. That is not a risk Minnesota should take.
No.
If you're genuinely serious, we are a contending basketball team.
Correct.
And you are betting on what, 9 points a game outside of Naz Reid off the bench the last 4 games?
Mm-hmm.
If that's what you're betting on, I don't know what to tell you. And I like TJ. I actually am not out on TJ. I'm actually pretty hesitant on the idea of packaging him with Rob Dillingham. I don't want to do that because I think it's injuries with him. I genuinely don't think he forgot how to play. I think he's hurt.
Yeah,
so
I do too. And you kind of got into it right there. So one of the main reasons why I'm actually okay with the right target parting with TJ is because we're essentially bringing somebody in to replace him. His exact role.
Good player.
And be with him, if he was 21, it'd be absolutely not. I'm not trading him right now. But the fact that he's 25, we need someone right now. I would love to wait another year because I think TJ is good. I think he can be a starting caliber player. And he's a great flyer for any tanking team just starting a rebuild. Honestly, the Chicago Bulls should be very interested in a flyer on TJ. So because we're kind of getting that skill set and who we're getting back, that is the only reason why I'd be willing to put him into a deal.
And before we get all the way into that, everybody, Tim touched into it earlier. So Minnesota, if you can add anything, I would appreciate you, man. Minnesota's a first apron team. And the difference between a first apron and second apron, very simplistically, is that a first apron team, you could take in more or less players than you take out as long as it's equal or less money when you deal them. So if Minnesota dealt 2 players and got 1 back, and Minnesota dealt $9 million for an $8 million contract, they can do that. If they get into the second apron now, they need to take in as many players as they take out. So it has to be a 3 for 3, a 2 for 2, 1 for 1. Minnesota can do a 2 for 1, 1 for 2 right now. And there's other little stuff that with like signings and stuff that are different with the second apron versus first apron. But for trade purposes, that's the biggest difference. Is there anything else you want to add, Tim?
Yeah, the other thing I see is a lot of people do 3-for-1s. I've seen. And what I'd caution people to think about with 3-for-1s is you have to legally carry 14 players. For a 2-week span, consecutive 2-week span, you can carry 13 legal NBA contracts on a roster. But you eventually have to get to 14. So if you're trading 3 players to get to 18.9 million to match for Colin Sexton, you're not going to be able to fill out the roster and stay under the second apron with veteran minimums. So just I want to toss that out there. Like when you're the only trade work or trade frames I think that work because we do have 3.5 million in space are 2-for-1s or 3-for-2s. The 3-for-1s, just retire them. It's not going to happen. We don't have the flexibility to get back to the second apron or stay under the second apron.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get a Colin Sexton, you have to deal a Dante or Mike contract too. So there's that extra wrinkle. Dante, I don't see being dealt this deadline.
No.
Mike, I personally speculate there's a better chance than people are letting on that something could happen. Not guaranteeing it. I think Minnesota could get a good contract for under $9 million between Rob and Lenny or something. I'm sure they would be happy with that.
Yeah. So let's dive into those targets. For the exercise and having enough names to talk about, I did operate on the assumption that Mike Conley is available for trade. So most of my targets are going to be under that 9.2 million. The reason being is Rob makes 6.5, Terrence makes 2.7. That equates to 9.2 million. So what I'm targeting is a player that currently makes 9.2 million or less that we can bring in, have enough space to fill the roster to that standard 14 NBA contracts and be compliant. And have that be a needle mover by taking 2 people not in the rotation to solve our 7th man need. So we're not hurting depth to create depth, to solve them. We'd be plugging one hole and opening a couple others. So people that fall under that range, I think the 2 biggest names are Dosunmu and Quentin Grimes. So AO is my number 1 target. If you are around my Twitter whatsoever, you know that by about now. It's a little bit difficult to see the Bulls' interest in Rob Dillingham because they are so guard heavy. Now, I mean, if they decide to trade Coby White to someone else and they're open to dealing AO, all of a sudden I could see, okay, why would they not take a flyer on Rob? So in any of those Chicago Bulls moves, I really feel that TJ is the linchpin. I don't think there's heavy interest. Maybe you could do a 3-team, like maybe the New Orleans Pelicans love Rob Dillingham, and they'd be willing to send Yves Misi, who is allegedly available. Really good young backup. Excuse me. He's probably a starting caliber center, but young, has some potential. Maybe in that scenario, you can get Chicago their future center of the future and future center of the future, and you can give them Terrence Shannon Jr. That all of a sudden looks like an attractive package. So there's some options. Chicago has, again, three people. Trey Jones, a lot of people liked him. I don't see it as realistic because he's on a first of the 3-year contract. The Bulls have no incentive to trade him. But Coby White and Dosunmu are expiring contracts. No guarantee they could stay. I know there's some talk about AO wanting to re-sign, so maybe he's unlikely. But those are the 2 guys I think are very highly probable to be dealt on Chicago.
I think you tapped into something we've talked about the show recently, so shout out to you on that.
Yeah.
So I made a Quentin Grimes mock trade last week, and I know that's off topic from these guys, but the point of that was that if you were going to get a Quentin Grimes, also, why would the Sixers have interest in Rob Dillingham? So in that scenario, I made a mock trade where Day'Ron Sharpe was in a 3-team trade with Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah.
Sharpe went to Philly, and then Quentin Grimes went to Minnesota, and Rob and Lenny and something else went to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So that's the structure that makes a lot of sense when you're talking with a Quentin Grimes team or an Dosunmu team. It's that they don't probably want Rob. You have to find a team that has something that they would want and see if they like Rob. And I think all of us speculate that teams like this could really like a backup big. I know the Sixers have Adam Bona and Drummond, but I think they could use another.
Yeah.
So
They've talked about that too. I happened to come across a Philly podcast, and actually one of the big main things that they talk about is a backup big, another center. So I know that's something that their fan base talks about. So we'll see. The other piece that I have in mind and why I'm so infatuated with these 9.2 million or less people is the ability to retain them long term. So do you mind if I get into this now, or
of
should
course,
I?
yeah.
Okay. So Minnesota has $22 million of cap space under the second apron next year. We have 5 roster spots open, so 22 million for 5 people. Some of those are Bones Highland. Our draft pick is probably about 2.8 million. We have a first round pick in 2 seconds. And then by the way, we're probably not going to use more than 2 of those picks. I would suggest probably 2 of them are outgoing at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you were to trade a TJ and Rob, that future money would get us all the way up to 33.7 million under the cap, or excuse me, under the second apron, with 6 players left. So by trading those 2 players with future term and Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr., you all of a sudden have about 17 to 18 million dollars, assuming the other contracts are under 5 million a piece. You probably have about 17 to 20 million dollars to give an extension to somebody. This is a core reason why I'm not interested in Coby White. I think Coby is going to be more expensive than 20 million, and we can't afford to re-sign him. Dosunmu, I think he's a mid-level exception player. I think he's somebody which the mid-level exception is going to be anywhere from 14.8 million to 15.1. So he is somebody where 16 million, that range that we have, we can absolutely afford that contract, which is
Mm-hmm.
why I'm so interested. This is about you're trading a future piece like Rob and TJ. You cannot trade that for a rental. You've got to be
No.
confident in your ability to re-sign that person. So that's just an important thing to call out. Like when you're thinking those big names like Coby, it's like, well, what happens this summer when he wants 25 million and we can't afford it? Like now you have to do a bigger pivot for a player you're not even certain is worth those pivots.
Are we sure that Coby's worth 25 though?
I don't think
Just
he is.
with how
I mean,
hesitant teams are to pay players now, and kind of
yeah.
that middle market sort of shrinking with the new CBA
Mhm.
landscape, with the superstars still getting their money and the middles are kind of getting
Mhm.
pushed to a tier below. Are we even
And it
sure that
could.
Coby White is going to get 24 million? I kind of feel like 17 million for Coby kind of makes sense at this point. Is that
Yeah.
crazy?
You know what? If I'm wrong on that and we can re-sign him for 18 million, my interest in Coby Wright's definitely reinvigorated. I just think it's important that if we're going to give up the Rob asset, and especially if we're going to give up the TJ asset, which I think is the linchpin of making a Chicago move work, to be honest with you.
Bring the boy back home.
Yeah, exactly. You can't give up those 2 assets for a rental. You just can't. You have to be able to re-sign him. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the market is pushing Kobe's value down to the point where he gets 21 million, and maybe you could squeeze that. It would just be pretty tight next year. If I'm wrong about that, Coby White is somebody I'd be interested in again.
Although the Coby thing, I'm sure even if that's the case, we will have the 4 months of drama and uncertainty of what is he worth. Whereas in AO, we're kind of like, you know what? We saw Nikhil money last summer. That feels
Yeah.
right for AO right now. So makes it sad too, man, because I keep looking back and I'm like, all right, we're just trying to fight to make room for the money we could have given Nikhil.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's truly unfortunate that Nikhil, when we did that bridge deal, the 2 years, 9 million, it is so unfortunate it wasn't a third year, and we paid a little bit more at the time, because we have the Nikhil money this summer.
Yep.
We
That's
just
what
did
we're
not
trying to
have it
get.
last summer. And it would have required us like trying to get a first round pick for Dante. I'm sure they maybe poked around of like what would it take to keep Nikhil, but I'm sure it was just a cascading events that just were like, we should just resign or keep Dante and let him go.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Who are some
Yeah.
other players you want to consider for Minnesota before we transition to the last part of the
Yeah.
show?
So let's get into the kind of not as sexy names, to be honest with you. Someone that's really kind of piqued my interest in the vein of a versatile utility knife and most importantly, a tone setter. Terrence Mann on the Brooklyn Nets is a legit playoff rotation player wasting away on a terrible team. He's not going to have much gravitas because he's not like a flashy player. He's one of those like he's solid at everything he does. He's a combo guard, but he can play like a wing. He can handle in a pinch, but he's not a point guard. He can kind of shoot at a respectable rate, but he's not elite. He's a do everything forward who plays with a great energetic attitude. But one of the core reasons why I'm kind of interested in him is he has a $16 million contract. So you can get him. He's already re-signed. You can probably get him for pretty much salary match in a couple seconds for doing business. Um, and that's a player that is on a really tradable contract for a future deal. So I think it's something that where we can solve that seventh man rotation for pretty much Rob and Mike Conley. And now you have this contract that's in that perfect little zone of 16 million. It's not a bloated contract. And he's a good player, so it's not like a bad contract, but definitely trade filler. Where you could pair that 16 million with maybe a Julius next year at 31. And all of a sudden you can get to that 48, $50 million range for a bigger pivot. So Terrence Mann, I like because he's that utility, do everything, kind of perfect for a seventh man role this year. But it's also a contract that makes a future pivot more feasible without having to give up a Nas Reed, without having to give up a Jaden McDaniels to make the money work. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really good wrinkle onto that because I do agree there's this world where maybe this team just needs another tone setting wing off the bench, right? Somebody who can play physical, adds more length, adds, floor spacing. Terrence Mann does that. Another person I had in mind also, Najee Marshall in Dallas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
similar,
So,
emotional, intense player, great defender. I think he's in that $10 to $13 million range, if I'm not mistaken. He's got some really good passing chops too. Like he's kind of got that utility, can do a little bit of everything. I think he's kind of wasted away on bad teams the last few years. Somebody who I think you make him a seventh man on a great team, and then I think more people know who Najee Marshall is, and it might literally. I mean, it's that 10 to, I think he's making like 12. I might be wrong. I think it's in that range.
9 mil. He's at 9 mil.
He's at even better.
Yeah. Yep.
Even better.
And he's on a multi-year. He's on a multi-year too.
He signed, right? Did he sign a 3-year 27?
So he's at like 9.8 next year.
Okay.
Something like that. Might be 28. Might be 28. Because I think he goes up to 9.8 mil. But besides the point, he's very gettable. And the only thing is I think every playoff contender should be called. Same with Dosunmu. But every playoff contender is probably calling Chicago, calling the Mavericks on those type of guys. I would love Najee. I'm actually not convinced we truly need the ball handler. I think that's a future pivot. I think the starting lineup is the starting lineup. Maybe you can get a Coby White who can push Dante. But I don't think that big point guard's coming. No. I want to solve the seventh man spot. If you can get more defense, you can get that floor spacing. Najee does that. It's a good name to toss out if we can make that work.
Like he has some real passing connective tissue stuff to his offensive game. I'd say even more than Terrence Mann. So that's where I think people love the idea of him because when he has the ball in pace, he's not going to make bad decisions often. So that's just a dude I think a lot of teams are going to like, as you mentioned. But that was my name. Anybody else for you?
It's a good name. Yeah. So I want to touch on Quentin Grimes. He's a great name. You had a great mock trade on that. I did see that. The only wrinkle I want to toss out on Quentin Grimes, and I just found this out, he does not have his bird rights. So we would not be able to re-sign him.
Oh, because he got the qualifying offer.
Correct. So we would have to have cap space to re-sign him. So he's a rental through and through. So if you're able to get him cheap, maybe it's Mike Conley and a flyer on TJ. Sure, it's a rental. But we would not be able to keep Quentin Grimes long term.
That's too bad. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That makes me not want him anymore.
There are a couple other moves, and this is kind of getting in above the 9.2 million space. So Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham together equate to about 17.3 million. So the next wave of people I'm going to throw out are below that 17 million mark. So that's a Dennis Schroader, someone like that. That could be an intriguing name. Coby White's in that mix as well, but we already kind of touched on him. Just a next kind of tier where maybe Dennis can come in and run your bench unit, give you a little bit of defense to help cover guards. We know he's going to be available because the Kings are going to sell everyone with a pulse. So
Malik
that's a
Monk,
name to throw out too.
is he possible? Is Malik Monk at that range?
So Malik Monk makes 18.7 million. It's the
Like
same
Colin.
issue. Same issue as Colin Sexton I think I have those
Good.
two in my camp of they're worth mentioning, but I just don't see it happening because we'd have to do 3 for 1 to get there. And then it's a question of how do we fill out the roster? Both players, I'm not certain are worth it to have that many logistics post trade to figure out.
Yeah.
Um, both, especially Colin Sexton. I think Colin Sexton is going to become an expiring contract, and you can get him for like 8 mil this summer. If we love Colin Sexton, I would rather just wait for that 18 million to hit the dust, and we could probably just use our mid-level exception to get him next summer.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have to make a move right away. Sometimes you can stay patient. And I think we mentioned, unless there's like a big surprise move like Minnesota being willing to deal Randall, I don't think that's going to happen. But I'll say never
No,
with Tim Connolly. I'm not ruling anything out
yeah,
ever anymore. I've just
for
learned that the
sure.
hard way. So I would give that like a
Yeah,
less than 10% chance, but it's worth mentioning. Maybe there's a better chance it happens than Dallas winning the lottery last year. So who
yeah,
knows? But I think this is a good way to transition to the end of the show because we talked about mentioning this as well. I made a list
yeah.
the other day and it got, I think, some controversy, some traction in the basketball world, but I just made my top 10 players who are under 25 to build around. And I mentioned, I think, 8 honorable mentions because the league is so deep and it frustrates me how poorly the
Mhm.
NBA markets its young stars. So I thought it was a good way
Yeah,
to
no
kind of
kidding.
shine light on it. So my top 10, so I had number 1, Victor Wembanyama, number
Mm.
2, Anthony Edwards, so I think that's the clear top 2. And then going back, it's 3, Cooper Flag, 4, Kate Cunningham, and then there's the next gap of guys who I don't think are number 1s, but are really good. J-Dub, Chet, Con Knipple, Amin Thompson, VJ Edgecombe, Evan Mobley. That's my top 10.
Nice. Nice.
And some honorable mentions, the next group, it's Jalen Johnson, Keontae George, Alex
Mm.
Sarr, Alperen Şengün, Scotty Barnes. That's my top 15
Cool.
of young players to put everything to build around or
Yeah.
become Minnesota Timberwolves as the Scottie Pippen next to Ant someday.
Yeah, I think that's a great list, and it's great to point out amidst all the BS going on of all the different opinions, what the Timberwolves boil down to. If you have Anthony Edwards, you're gonna have a shot against anybody. Now, one step further, we touched on this earlier in the show. They have good pieces around Ant. So when you
Mm,
have this good of a player, you always have a chance. So I get it. Like in a 4-game losing streak, it's right to maybe question a couple things. But when you have such a great young piece in Anthony Edwards, you just can't give in to despair, man. It's he's gonna give you a chance in everything, every series, every game. Uh, Teams spend their entire lives looking for an Anthony Edwards.
I think people need to relax a little bit on the Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, Jaden, that's not good enough thing. I'm not saying it is for
Yeah.
sure. I'm not. But I just think relative to what other stars have had, I think Ant's better off than what Luka Doncic had in Dallas most of the time because Jalen Brunson
Mhm.
wasn't realized yet. And the supporting
Yeah.
cast was then and there. It sometimes looked good, sometimes didn't. And then you look at like young LeBron, you look at,
Yeah.
I mean, outside of like Shea, I'm not sure a team has done clearly better to put
Yeah.
around than Anthony Edwards at this point of their career. You could say San Antonio maybe in a couple years. I personally think their young guards are further away than people think they are.
Oh yeah.
So I still think the way Minnesota's been able to get high-level players around Anthony Edwards. I mean, he's had how many All-Stars play with him now? 3? Like,
Yeah.
Jokic hasn't had 1 yet. So Minnesota, I think, has done a good job. And I also am a believer in that second wave of players. I think Nas and Jaden and even Jay have another gear in them at minimum that makes them formidable in the next Anthony Edwards timeline, next window. So Minnesota, we can get frustrated at the Rob Dillingham draft pick. We can get frustrated at some decisions they made and some questions this roster has. I do think they've done enough where they deserve patience. And this year, if they make a good trade at the deadline, there's a world this team can win it all. I really believe
Absolutely.
that.
And I'm so happy you brought up Dallas because I think it's a great comp because that Dallas team was up and down. Like they're good. Like they had Luka. You didn't want to count them out. And they made a couple perfect role player acquisitions. And that team went off. They went off down the stretch and made the finals. I think the Wolves are in the same position. I don't think we're far off. Yes, I have concerns that Julius Randle as a second star may not be the best fit long term, but there is enough talent around Anthony Edwards where if you can just sprinkle the right fitting piece and replace it with a piece that's been so brutally negative in Mike Conley, and maybe you get more development from a Johan Berenger over the next 3 months.
Derek
And all of a
Lively,
sudden,
second half.
man, all of a sudden you could be in a Dallas situation where you just kind of sprinkled the right little pieces, moved the right things out, the right things in, and boom. A team with one of the most elite starting player net ratings fixes a couple of other different issues, and now they have a legit 8-man playoff rotation that fits a little bit better, offers a little more versatility, and boom, it would not surprise me if they just put it together. So I'm happy you brought up Dallas. I think we have an opportunity this deadline where I think we're good enough by a couple role players. Maybe you get Jose Alvarado, maybe you get him and a wing. Just a little bit more attitude, just a couple more guys, shift them in, get guys that aren't producing out of the rotation, and boom, you could really watch it come together because we're not far off. We're really not that far off.
You can argue this is the most important trade deadline in the last 5 to 10 years for Minnesota because a small move is the difference between this team being a solidified contender and a team that's just a little too flawed to really get it done.
Yeah.
And that move is possible. That move is possible. They just need to make the right small move. It's not like they need to like change the chicken in the steak. It's like I need just a little more, need a little more brown sugar, need a little more, whatever you make chicken with. So we'll see what happens, but it's going to be a very important.
Yeah, and they're good enough to the point where they can be patient with the next big pivot. I think there's a big pivot coming. I hear you, everyone out there screaming for a ball handler. I hear you. I just don't think that equal caliber player to Julius is going to be available at the point guard position this deadline. It's not going to happen. Not to mention, I mentioned this earlier, we have 2 tradable first round picks this summer. The big pivot makes way more sense this summer, and this team is good enough to be patient. I know that's frustrating. I know that's not what fans want to hear, but we're good enough and have enough talent around Ant where we can be patient with a 24-year-old superstar. We don't need to make that move right now because we're feeling the pressure.
That's
if
a
this were
powerful position to be in. That's a powerful position to be in. You can get it done this year with what you have, maybe with a small move that doesn't lose your leverage later. And then you can see what you want to do with whatever leverage you have in the summer. I'm not saying this team has a ton of leverage right now, but they'll have more in the summer. And then you can make a more calculated decision. That Randall contract will be good in the summer. That Nas contract will be good in the summer. That Dante contract will be good in the summer.
I mean, like let's say we lose in the first round. Sucks. But you know what? Now you have what you need to be like, okay, it's time to pivot the roster towards Ant. Maybe we move on from Rudy. Maybe we move on from Julius. Maybe we move on from both. The point is, they have the luxury to be patient and collect that data and see how
Yeah.
this goes for another year. We don't need to make that pivot right now. I suspect that we can make that smaller move, a role player who can then be a tradable piece or just another depth piece post next trade, to really help fill out the roster, or make, like, for example, the Terrence Mann situation, or help make other possibilities closer to reality. So I just think they're in a position where just add a seventh man, give this team, double down on this team while keeping the powder dry.
I'm with that so much. Unless Giannis is available.
Yeah, then
Make a move. Make a move.
I love Jaden McDaniels. I've been so patient with that agenda, but I would trade him in a heartbeat for Giannis. That's probably the only tier of player I'd ever consider even trading Jaden for.
Yep. If that move's out there, make the move.
Oh,
It probably isn't, but you never say never in the NBA.
Yeah.
Never say never with Tim Conley.
No kidding. No kidding. So it'll be fun to see what they do. It's just under 2 weeks now. I think the market's kind of held up for Giannis, but if that comes to fruition and he gets traded, I think it's going to be a really busy last week of the deadline.
It's going to be such an interesting deadline. Tim,
Yeah.
It's an honor having you on the show, my friend. It was so good. Congratulations on being part of Daily Wolves. That is going to be so great to be able to hear your voice on podcast platform all the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. This is a fun discussion. Wolves are in a fun period. They better win today. But keep an eye out on the news for the next couple weeks here, because I am very confident the Wolves will be pushing for a move.
Deadline's on February 5th, which is my mom's birthday. So it's going to be a very big day in this household. So that'll be interesting to navigate. But yeah.
Tim Conley's got to get her a birthday present. Come on now.
Yeah, give her a birthday present. She wants Giannis for her birthday.
Let's go.
Right?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it'll be fun to navigate. Thank you so much, dude.
Yeah,
awesome.
it'll be great. Appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to seeing what happens here for the next couple weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for listening to the show. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this is a growing fan-oriented community. We are almost at 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, so we are growing fast, and I appreciate all of the growth and the community. That it's all you guys. It's all you guys who create it and are a part of it. So lucky to have all of you guys part of this group. If you ever want to be on the show, we got Wolves Fandom Friday. This was supposed to be a Wolves Fandom Friday episode, but we're all kind of not feeling good this time of the year, but we got it all going. And next week, we'll have Wolves Fandom Friday. We have a fan next week. So if you guys want to enter it in the next couple of weeks, you can always leave me a DM, Wilder at WilderAdams.com. You guys are awesome. Tim, you're the best. Love hearing your knowledge, man. I learn every day from you. So you're the best. This is Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame mode fandom. Dude, that was